Yep, you throw in another dead body.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Alex Reid.
Thank you for listening to Author Stories. We are now more than 350 episodes in and not slowing down anytime soon. It's because of you, the loyal listeners who tune in each day to Author Stories to hear the best author interviews around, and I just wanted to say thank you. On the right-hand sidebar of the website at hankgarner.com, you can find links where you can subscribe to the show, and it helps other people find the show. The more people subscribe, the higher we go in the rankings, and the easier people find us. I'd like to thank some sponsors this week for helping us bring the show to you. I, your humble host, have a brand new book out. It's called The Pandora Codex. Oliver Weber, Book 1, A Closely Guarded Secret, A Stolen Artifact, and a Madman Trying to Open a Portal to Hell. Can Oliver Weber become the hero he's meant to be? Pick up the Pandora Codex now. It's the first book in the Oliver Weber series. The second book, Jacob's Ladder, comes out very soon. Go ahead, dig into this series. Grab it now. You won't be disappointed. My friend Patricia Gilliam has a new series called Series Craft 101, and she has a series of books, the Fictional Character Creator Workbook, Setting and World Building Workbook. If you are looking to put together a long-running series like Patricia has done, these are some things that she's learned and that she can help you to get on top of that makes managing a long series much easier. Go check it out. There's a link in the show notes, and we'll be talking about it more. Bocara Brumley has a new book called Imani Earns Her Cape. It's a middle grade novel. You might have heard us talk about it on the show just a week or so ago when Bocara was on. A 12-year-old Imani should be celebrating the most important day of her life by eating myrfruit, casting flying spells, and laughing with her mother, but there's just one massive problem. Her mother's been kidnapped by a giant troll, and now Imani is lost in the Fey realm with no way home back to Virginia. Completing her rite of passage alone is inadvisable, but if Imani doesn't want to lose the only family she's ever had, she may have no choice. Transportal train travel, underwater cities, submarines, sea dragons, and unexpected family all combine in Imani Earns Her Cape. Thanks for listening to the show. At the end, as always, we have an audiobook clip from my friend Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Alex Gray back on the show with me. Alex was on the show a few months ago, and we were talking about the Lorimer series, the DCI Lorimer series. And I'm excited to have you back to talk about the new book. We've got because you are in Scotland and in the UK. You have an interesting release schedule as that books come out here in the U.S. and over there. And we've got a new book coming out here in the States that we want to talk about, and it's called The Silent Games. Is that right?
That's correct, and it's lovely to be back with you, Hank.
Well, thank you. Last time we talked about how you got started in crime fiction, and we had a great conversation about that, and you invited me to come to this great writing festival that you guys have in Scotland, and my wife and I are actually talking about it. So
great! I'm so pleased.
Yeah, I hope to get to see you in person. But tell me about this new book that's releasing in the States.
Right. Well, The Silent Games was originally called The Bird That Did Not Sing for lots of different reasons I won't go into. But The Silent Games is based around the Glasgow Commonwealth Games of 2014. And actually, it's a super day for you and I to be talking about it, because 4 years on to the very day, today is the opening of the Commonwealth Games in Australia. How about that for a coincidence?
I am not familiar with the Commonwealth Games. What are the Commonwealth Games?
Well, the Commonwealth is the British Commonwealth, and that includes all the countries that used to be under the banner of the United Kingdom, like Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, various countries that were under our protection, under our banner, so to speak. They belong to the British Commonwealth. So it's not like the Olympic Games, it's worldwide. It has fewer countries participating, but it's just as important as far as athletes are concerned. And we were absolutely delighted 4 years ago to be the host city, i.e. Glasgow. It was Glasgow 4 years ago. And what I really wanted to tell you was when my daughter was asking me prior to that, Mum, what are you going to write next? I said, well, I'm going to write this story about the Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games and a plot to blow up the opening ceremony. Mum, you can't do that. Oh, red rag taboo. I said, watch me.
Well, they say write what you know, and that's what I tell people is that anything that goes on around me is fair game. I can pick it up and turn it into a story at a moment's notice. So be careful what you say around me. You might just get written in.
That's right. And it was something I did know. Not that I'm a bomber or anything like that, but you may have heard, quite a number of years ago, there was an attempted terrorist attack on Glasgow International Airport. Now, this attack, this attack was foiled, thank goodness, by a very brave chap who went and tackled two overseas terrorists. And the terrorists ended up being taken away to hospital. Nobody else was hurt. But I did hear from my contacts in the police and in the forensic services that these chaps had had a dry run and actually had exploded a bomb way, way out in the Stirlingshire countryside. So the Silent Games begins where this actual dry run takes place. So it was fictional, but it really had happened. So the book opens with, I suppose, a scene of pastoral quiet, tranquility in this woodland, and then the suddenness and the horror of this bomb going off. There's no person there, but a poor little robin redbreast gets killed and an awful lot of trees get demolished. The whole place is just an uproar. And this was, in fact, my imaginary scene based on something that really did happen.
Well, here in the States, in 1996, we hosted the Olympic Games in Atlanta, and there was a bombing there. Someone set off a pipe bomb there, and a lot of people were injured. And I think one person was killed and over 100 people injured. And what's really scary when you start thinking about it, and of course I know you're going to tell us all about this in a minute, but when you have that many people gathered, and we really do have a sense of trust that just when we gather as large groups that everything's going to be okay, and there really is a societal trust that we don't all stay locked up in our houses all day.
That's right.
So you had this real life experience of the games in Glasgow, but then the dry run of this thing that actually did happen or could have happened. How did you start fitting those pieces together, and how did this story come to be?
Well, I did ask a lot of questions from a lot of experts, and one was the anti-terrorist squad in Glasgow connected with Police Scotland, and another was all the officials of the Glasgow Commonwealth Games. Dave Grevenberg, an American, was the CEO, and he allowed me to go backstage before the games began to see all sorts of things. The only person who didn't want to talk to me was their head of security. I wonder why. But, can you imagine the kind of security nightmare putting on something like this must entail?
I can't imagine.
We had Her Majesty the Queen being the person who was going to open the Commonwealth Games. Do you remember the Olympic Games from 2012, where there was a spoof of Her Majesty coming down from a helicopter after a James Bond encounter in the palace? I don't know if you remember that. We all thought that was very, very funny. But it would not have been very, very funny if somebody had tried to commit a terrorist act at the opening when Her Majesty was there. And that got me thinking, what if? And that's where every crime writer begins. What if? What if there was some sort of deranged group who had it in for maybe royalists, had it in for, anything to do with the Commonwealth Games. They wanted to make their point. And then, of course, I started ravelling other threads, because that's only one of the three main plot lines in the book.
Well, that was going to be a question I was going to ask, is that you kind of have the culmination of the terrorist attack, but I would imagine there's a lot of setup that needs to go into that, how the terrorists, their reasoning and how they go about carrying this out. How do you start kind of reverse engineering an event like this so that you can properly bring the reader into all of the lead up to that?
Well, I made it quite vague at the beginning. I didn't give the terrorists names. I gave them numbers. They themselves were almost secret from one another. And I would describe them, but only sketchily. And it was a kind of clandestine group who were very much against the political and legal, I suppose, setup of the United Kingdom and Scotland in particular. And one thing I wanted to get away from was the Al-Qaeda idea, because we're so used to having Eastern mad people commit these offences. And I thought, I'm going to turn this in its head. I'm going to make this a group of disaffected Scottish people who are descended from a particular clan in Scotland, and they want to really have a revolution. They want to take over, and in a crazy kind of way. But you do get people who are obsessed about and people who are anti-royalist. They're very Republican, and I thought, well, what if we have an extremist group like this? And I thought it would be fun. Fun. Blow up the Commonwealth Games. Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. I thought it would be fun to try this and make it different from the usual Eastern people.
Well, that's a really great point, because I think it is possible that, and this is going to sound horrible when I say it, but I realize that as I'm saying it. But we really get bored with the typical bad guy, or the typical, antagonist. We see the news.
You're so right. Yes, you're so right.
We see the news day after day after day, and we get desensitized to it. So one more Al-Qaeda plot is just one more. It's one more news story.
Exactly.
When it gets close to home, and we start realizing that the evil could actually be us, that's way more scary to me.
You're absolutely right, Hank, and that's where I started from. But the other thing I spoke to the police and I spoke to the Commonwealth Games people about was the possibility of there being an upsurge in human trafficking during the time of the Commonwealth Games. The Commonwealth Games people said, no, that won't happen. And the police contacts I had said, yes, it will. Now, way back when I was writing, you're thinking maybe 2012, 2013, 2012, I was probably writing this book. And there was very, very little, that's only 6 years ago, very little about human trafficking in the media. I found maybe 2 or 3 articles online, and that was it. By the time the book was published in 2014, it was acknowledged to be the third biggest criminal organised crime type of thing in the UK, if not in the world. And I think my timing was right. The thing that I found out was that sex traffickers into the UK came from three sources. One was Vietnam, one was Eastern Europe, and the other was Nigeria. And so I chose a very young Nigerian girl, just one girl, and I brought her story to life. And she was Asa. She couldn't speak English. And that's why I called it The Bird That Did Not Sing. There's a lot of other reasons for that. And that's where you get the silence of the silent games, because this girl does not know how to verbalise her plight. But she's taken prisoner, virtually, and uses a sex object in Glasgow. So that was a second big thread, very important, a very serious thread in the book.
Right. When you on the surface, when you're first conceptualizing a story, and you just have the big idea, the Commonwealth Games are attacked, and then you start finding these other sub threads. At what point do you realize, oh, these things can actually work together in concert? And as the writer, how much work do you do in bringing these story threads together before you actually start writing the book?
I don't. I never plot. I just let it happen. And I have to say, I was quite well into the book before I thought, how am I going to get these three things fixed together? Because the third thing was a personal thing for Lorimer, my detective superintendent. He was going to a school reunion, and he meets up with an old flame. And, she worms her way into his life again. So you have a personal thing, you have the work thing where he's trying to defuse this potential terrorist plot, and you have this awful thing about human trafficking, and he gets involved obviously in that because it's a criminal thing. So it was how I brought the three together. And I don't write down wee notes at the beginning before I write the book. It all happens in my brain. And I'll wake up at 3 and 4 in the morning and with eureka moments and think, yes, that's how I do it. And then I stagger upstairs to my attic study and I write it all down. So it just happens. It's imagination and it's thinking.
And being so closely connected to William Lorimer at this point probably helps, because you kind of understand how he is going to think and maybe how he's going to respond to things. That obviously plays into it, doesn't it?
Oh, totally. And I think the reader of this book, The Silent Games, begins to worry. This flame-haired beauty worming her way into, trying to worm her way into his affections again, actually living in his house with his wife Maggie. What's going to happen? Is he going to succumb to her undoubted charms? Is something? But I know Lorimer, and I know what's going to happen, and I know what he and Maggie are like. They're rock solid, and I had such fun with that. Though it's playing with the readers' expectations, with their hopes, with their tensions, their imagination as well, because the reader actually plays a lot of parts in writing a book. When they're reading between the lines. So what you're doing is you're suggesting possibilities, and they're looking at these possibilities. They think, no, don't do this, Lorimer. Don't let her into your life. It's great fun.
Well, Detective Lorimer always gets absorbed into the cases that he's working, but this one has a very personal attachment. Is that well, let me think how to ask this. When you're working on a scenario and a story idea, do you think ahead of time how Detective Lorimer is going to personally react to this, and how he's going to get completely absorbed into this case and this story?
Not really. I just kind of make it up as I go along. I know that sounds awfully daft, but it comes naturally. I would say I'm a very intuitive writer. And as you rightly say, I know him so well. I know how he's going to react. But, I can come to the end of a chapter and think, where did that come from? There's one moment, nothing to do with Lorimer, but to do with Asa in the flat where she's being held prisoner. There's one moment where the woman who's looking after her opens a door. I had no idea what was going to be behind that door. And then it just almost wrote itself. And I gasped, and I hope the reader gasps. But that's the way I work. I don't consciously know what's going to happen. Subconsciously, there's a lot going on, of course, because those who know about psychology know that the creative imagination is always working away, although you might not be in your head plotting things bit by bit by bit. Spontaneously, they seem to bubble up from the surface. It's a kind of magic.
Right. How many books in the Lorimer series does this make?
Well, the Silent Games, I can't remember what number that is. I think that's number 10 in the series.
Number 10. Wow.
Is it? Wow. But I don't know. I'm losing count. I'm writing number 16 at the moment.
Oh
I'm 2/3 of the way through number 16, which will be out in 2019. And number 15, as I say, has just been published. So, yeah.
Amazing.
But you've got a lot of things to see what's going to happen to Lorimer in the next few books. It's great fun.
I know. Is it a challenge to, I know it's probably not a challenge to find new circumstances to put him in. Because like you said, you can look at the daily news and there's always some, crazy story going on, that you can drop your protagonist into. But is it a challenge for him to keep his sanity throughout all this?
Oh, now there's a very good question. You need to read book 14, which is called Still Dark. And that book will answer that question.
Okay. All right. I'm making a note.
Mm-hmm.
Lorimer loses his sanity. Okay.
For that particular book, Police Scotland let me into a place called Castle Bray, which is the police rehabilitation centre where people go when they're injured or ill or whatever. Marvellous place. About 4,000 officers go through their gates every year. Up in rural Perthshire in Scotland.
Because the circumstances of the books are sometimes dramatic and are maybe the incidents are kind of sped up for the sake of writing fiction, because we know that all crimes are not solved, within 400 pages or so. Some cases, go over years and years, and sometimes they're just never solved. And, writing police procedure is sometimes more sexy, if you will, than real life, police procedure. Do you get comments from the local, police and the people that you're in contact with about, that they appreciate, the light that you shine on the work that they do?
Totally. In fact, the chap who is at the moment acting Chief Constable, highest rank we've got in Police Scotland, allows me access to anywhere I want to go, because he reckons that my books, because of the detail I show, are showing the public what the police actually do. So it's a symbiotic relationship I have with them. They're very, very good. They let me access just about anywhere, anytime I need to, for research purposes. And then in the book, the reader will see the reality. So that's one thing. But talking about a case not happening in 400 pages or whatever, the book that follows the Silent Games is called Keep the Midnight Out. And that particular book is set over 2 different timescales, 20 years apart. And the old case, the cold case 20 years old, comes backwards and forwards into the present day plot. And this is a case that has been unsolved for 20 years. And it impinges on the one that Lorimer's dealing with in 20 years on in 2015, 1995 to 2015. And an awful lot has happened in that 20 years in the world, never mind Police Scotland.
Right.
And that was an interesting one to do.
I bet. What scares Detective Lorimer? Because he's been through so many different scenarios. He's solved so many cases. He's seen the darkest of the dark and has been able to shine some light on that. But as a character, what is it that scares him, that keeps him getting up and going to work every day?
Well, what scares him, he's actually got claustrophobia. He's very, very claustrophobic. He cannot stand in closed spaces, which is exactly the same as me. I mean, don't ask me to go caving or anything like that, or go into a narrow tunnel. That would just freak me out. MRI scans are things of great deep danger to me. If they were above my neck, I couldn't imagine going into an MRI scanner again. Once I had to do that and had what I understood later on was a panic attack. So I've actually had a panic attack, and I would give Lorimer a panic attack if he ever found himself in a bad situation. But you know what? You're talking about fear. Doing something you're afraid of and doing it anyway, that's what's brave. Having the courage to just blunder into something isn't really bravery, it's bravado. And I think this is a thing about Lorimer. It's not something about fear that makes him get up every day. I suppose he's driven by a sense of needing to bring people to justice. And he's also very aware of victims, very aware that he has to do something to help victims come to terms with the awful tragedies in their lives. And the only way he can do that is by bringing a killer or killers to justice.
Alex, what if a writer is beginning and they have the idea that they want to write stories like you do, or they're blessed with the gift like you are, let me put it that way, but they don't know where to start. What advice would you give someone who's just starting out and doesn't know how to get into the business?
Well, you've just got to write, and you've got to have an idea. And the idea has got to take over you so much that you want to write this story. And it doesn't really matter in the beginning whether you think you're going to get published or not. That's way, way in the distance. What you've got to do is to write your story to the best of your ability and finish it. And that's the big thing. I mean, actually writing a 90 or 100,000 word novel and getting to these magic words, the end, that is a success. That is an achievement. That's what you want to start with. Forget the publication thing. That's a completely new ball game. Once you've written your story, you can think about that. But it's writing it to the best of your ability. Write the story you want to write. Use the idea that has possessed you and go with it. Persevere and edit.
That's solid advice. Solid advice. After 16 novel, I think you said you're working on the 16th Lorimer novel now. Yeah. Do you ever look back on that initial experience in the beginning, and do you notice how your process has changed, how you have changed as a writer, how you've matured? Are those things that you're cognizant of?
Well, when I was writing book 15, I noticed that I got through the middle of the book without the usual, my goodness, this is a load of absolute crap. I'm writing dreadful stuff. And I thought, here, I haven't had that moment. Maybe this is terrible. But in fact, I think it's a very good book and it seems to be doing awfully well. So maybe I'm getting a wee bit more confident in my own writing. I'm not sure. I still have a lot of criticism of myself. I mean, every day I edit what I've written the day before. I'm always trying to make my writing better. I don't seem to have any problem with writing. I've never ever had writer's block. I think perhaps you get a little bit more self-belief by the time you've got to book 16. But, there's something always at the back of your mind thinking, maybe I'll be found out this time.
Well, you mentioned that middle of the book and how I
yes.
call it the mushy middle.
The muddle in the middle is what my pal calls it.
Right. Because that really is the hardest part for most writers. Most writers can really come up with a great concept, and the first couple of chapters where you're really building that tension, those are the easy parts. And then a lot of times when I'm writing, I'll know where my character's going to end up. Maybe I don't know all of the details, but a lot of times I'll have a picture of a final scene. It's something that I'm kind of writing toward. So that part is easy. And then a lot of the emotional wrap up and that's easy for a lot of writers. But man, that middle where you have to connect the beginning with the end can really be treacherous. Have you discovered anything along the way that makes that part any easier?
Yeah, you throw in another dead body.
Note to self: kill more people.
Notice the Glasgow chuckle. We've got a terrible sense of humour in Scotland.
Yes. Well, I come from a long line of Scots, so I think I inherited that as well.
You understand that? Okay.
Yeah, that's
You're
right.
going to enjoy bloody Scotland when you come in September.
Oh, I can't wait.
Oh, yes,
So,
you've got to come.
note to self: kill more people. Stack the bodies. Gotcha. Okay.
Oh, dear.
Oh man. Well, tell us about Keep the Midnight Out. That's another new book. Now, tell us about that, if you would.
Oh, it's one of my favourite books of all time. I wish my mother had lived. She only lived 5 days after my first book was published.
Oh.
Mum was born in the island of Mull on the Hebridean coast, and the cottage where Lorimer and his wife Maggie go is not a fictional cottage. It was a family cottage belonging to my uncle and then my big cousin. And we used to go as children. It was a haven. It was a paradise. And fictionally, Maggie and Lorimer go there during the summer holidays. And it's their breathing space. So they go there, as they always do, during Maggie. She's a school teacher, during her vacation time in July. And it starts off with Lorimer finding a body washed up in the beach. You know, I mean, how cruel can I be to this poor man? He's away for a break. You know, he's supposed to be bird watching, hill climbing, having picnics with his wife, and I give him a body, you know. Ah, poor guy. But it reminds him of when he was a very young detective 20 years before. It reminds him of this other victim, another case which was never solved. And the two ultimately come together. And I found it fascinating. But what was really good for me was setting it on the island of Mull, going there, being there. And it's called Keep the Midnight Out because you don't want the places you love most in the world to be tainted by any evil. You want them to keep the midnight, the darkness out. And it really upsets poor Maggie when their paradise is invaded by the snake, if you can put it that way symbolically. But they do come to terms with the whole thing, and you know the situation is obviously resolved. But it was a wonderful book to write, and I had a second launch in Tobermory, the capital of Mull. It was a wonderful, wonderful time there. And as I say, if Mum was looking down from heaven to see that, she would have been smiling.
Oh, that's wonderful. And that book, Keep the Midnight Out, is going to be releasing here in the U.S. In May, I think.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
but it's already out in the U.K. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, we have a lot of listeners in the UK and all through Europe. So that book is out already, and I think there's a couple of other books not available in the US that you can pick up there. Is that right?
That's correct. The first 4 books, or the first 3 books rather, the first one is called Never Somewhere Else, originally published by Canongate, taken over now by Little Brown. And the second and third books, the second is called A Small Weeping, the third is called Shadows of Sounds, and the second and the third are published by Alison and Busby in London. And the books that come after Keep the Midnight Out are also published by Little Brown in the UK and in the Commonwealth.
Excellent. There's plenty to read, listeners.
Thank
Go,
you.
there's going to be links in the show notes where you can pick up all of Alex's books. I highly recommend this series. If you love
Thank you, Hank.
mysteries and thrillers like I do, and my listeners know that's kind of my favorite thing, and police procedurals, you're going to absolutely love these books. Alex, where can people find you online if they want to follow along and keep up with the latest news?
Well, my website is alex-gray.com, and my Twitter handle is alexincrimeland.
Excellent. We'll put
Yeah,
links
a bit
to
like
it.
Alice in Wonderland, but Alex in Crimeland.
I just got that. I'm so slow. I've seen Alex in Crime Land, so I'm so slow. I just got that. Alex, thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show with me today.
Thank you, Hank. Bless you.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
They reverently slipped Jason's giant-size X-Men #1 from its mylar protector, drinking in the sweet aroma of browning paper and 3-color process that signals only the best and rarest and most wonderful of collectibles. On one page, Professor X raised his fingers to his temples and rallied his X-Men, his psychic commands radiating from his bald head like waves off hot asphalt. "I have psychic powers," Owen blurted. "I want Wolverine's claws." Jason was turning a page. "Snicked! Or, hey, get this. Lightsabers poking out the backs of my hands. Or even, no, I'm totally serious. I have psychic powers." "No, you don't." "I do." Jason laid the comic on the bedspread. He sighed. Owen could be such a spaz sometimes. "Okay," he said indulgently. "What number am I thinking of?" "Stop, it doesn't work that way. What I can do is called a psychic reading, off an object, like getting impressions. When the doorbell rings, if I put my hand on the knob, as soon as I do, I know who's there." "It's called looking through the peephole, moron." "Shut up! And when I touch the phone, I know who's calling." "I'm sure, Mr. Bullshit from Bullshit Mountain. Like my sister or my grandmother, I just know it's them." "There's no such thing as psychics." "Okay, you try." "Don't be stupid." "Are you chicken?" "Fine." "Okay." He snatched up a brown paper bag, spotted with grease, and dumped a few stale French fries into the trash can. "I'll put an object in this bag, and you try to guess what it is. Turn your back." Jason did, and heard a rustling behind his head. "Okay, you can look now." Owen produced the bag. It was rounded with some object now. "Don't touch yet, just think. Try to imagine what's inside." "Your lunch?" Jason sneered, but he closed his eyes and tried to imagine. He could hear Owen's breathing. Jason's nose itched. His brain grew bored with nothing to look at, and fragments of images swam in and out of his imagination. "Strawberry," he blurted. Owen reached into the bag, producing a white bowl. Jason had eaten Frosted Flakes from it about 3 days ago. A few stuck to it, like little beige fish scales. "See? I lose." "No, look here." Owen pointed. A design went around the sides of the bowl. A long string of vines and painted fruit. With strawberries. "That's," Jason began, but didn't know how to end the sentence. "It's cool. See? What did I tell you? Do it again." Jason closed his eyes. An image like daisies and sun and yellow, he blurted after 3 seconds. "Oh my God, open your eyes." Owen held a bright yellow highlighter pen. "I hadn't even put it in the bag." And so they went, for 30 minutes or more. A staple remover, a toy soldier, a sweat sock, a pencil. Jason never said precisely what was in the bag, but it was always close or related. He'd imagine a cockpit, and Owen would produce a game controller. He'd say plate, and the object would be a CD. He made right angles with his pointer fingers, shrugging, only to have Owen pull out Eliza's knitting needles. His friend became more and more enthusiastic, but Jason became a little scared. "You have a real gift," Owen said. "You're like Brilliant! Owen babbled for a long time about astral projection and ESP, how Jason was picking up signals from Owen's own psychic powers, which had obviously been doing the broadcasting. Owen left that night full of plans and experiments, vindicated in his beliefs. Jason sat on the bed after Owen left, thinking hard. He had no explanation for what he'd done, but he knew he hadn't faked it. He couldn't believe, but he couldn't deny either.